Let's start with that question I was telling you about, the big question. Who are you, my friend?
I am me. I've been asking myself this question for the last 5 years. That's the best answer I have so far, is I am me. And beyond that, my name is Kirstin Bewley. I am married to Tyler Bewley. I grew up in Georgia and all over the rest of the United States, but I claim Georgia as my home state. Born there, lived there longer than almost anywhere else outside of now Alabama. I am the mother of Evelyn and Eleanor, and so many other things. I'm currently a stay-at-home mom, but looking to get back into the workforce. So a lot of change, a lot of moving pieces, and none of those are who I am, but they're definitely a part of my story.
Yeah,
I'm also
awesome.
the second of 9 children. That's a big one. I always like to it's a big part of my story. So the second of 9 children. That was really exciting.
Wow. So yeah, as I told you before, one of the topics that I really want to dive into is your upbringing, because you've mentioned in the past, some of our exchanges, that you've had some interesting, you had an interesting upbringing, and hearing that you're the second of 9 children just adds layers of interest and fascination to me. So do you want to start with that? Like, I'd love to hear about the homeschooling and all that kind of stuff. I'm just fascinated.
Yes. Well, it didn't start out the insane cult-driven world that it eventually morphed into, and they usually never do. It started out, my parents came from alcoholic families, had a rough upbringing, both of them, and they found Jesus, and it changed their lives, and quite frankly, for the better. Compared my home life with all of its turmoil compared to what my parents came from, it had a big impact, but they also made some massive mistakes along the way. So when I was, I guess about 6 years old, my parents attended their first, it's called ATI conference, and that's Institute in, I don't even know, Advanced Training Institute. That's what it is. I've blocked so much of this from my brain. Not blocked, discarded. Put down is a much better term.
You filed it away somewhere where you don't always see it.
Well, I would like to say, I do think put down is maybe a better, it was a big part of our lives, and it needed to be set down and walked away from.
Nice.
So they attended their first seminar. The main seminars are, they were called I think IBLP, Institute in Basic Life Principles, and it has a really great name, Institute in Basic Life Principles, and it was very inspiring, and talked about how to get your life in line, and good things that were twisted over a long period of time, as most, I think, lies and cults and things of this nature come from. So they attended that. It was just my older brother and I. My parents had some miscarriages in okay. See, there it is. Mommy, hey. Help.
Feel free to do your thing, right?
My husband grabbed her just right behind her. Just
I think we should I think maybe later on we should sit down with you and Tyler and Candace and I and have a big, huge one, because I bet you we'd have lots of fun and lots of funny things to talk about.
That's where you have a glass of wine while you talk.
Yeah, 100%. Long distance double date.
Yes. So my parents, because this, of course, is my upbringing, is how they led us all into this. They had been just kind of normal Southern Baptist up until this point. We wore pants and shorts and makeup, and we were normal people. There was my older brother and I. We were we are 3.5 years apart. So I have an older brother, and then it was me. And then my mother had a series of miscarriages, which caused a lot of pain and heartache for them. And they found this, this seminar that our church didn't necessarily recommend, but they didn't say there's anything wrong with it because it's a Christian conference that has impacted a lot of lives and it's great and all of this other stuff. So they attended this conference. It had a big impact on them, and they decided at that point that they wanted to homeschool my brother and I. Still not necessarily a problem. I have all kinds of thoughts on homeschooling, but that's another topic.
We'll get into it.
Right. Yeah. And then my mom got pregnant with my younger sister. I was 7 years old when she was born. It was considered a miracle because at that point what of course in the small town South doctor would call a miracle, because my mother was told she had endometriosis and a tilted uterus and all of these things that she should have never even been able to conceive, my older brother and I, much less additional children. So she was on bed rest because she'd lost multiple pregnancies after me. It was a lot of turmoil and heartache at a crucial point in their lives that really drove a lot of these direct changes that we're about to head down with the birth of my younger sister. So it was, they called her their miracle baby. It changed a lot. And that really proved to my parents that some of these principles that they had put in place, that they had learned from this beautiful conference, they needed to become deeper members of, and not just attend the national conferences, but actually join the group that was putting them on.
So they associated the miracle of your younger sister's birth with their sort of interest and their joining up of this organization.
I don't want to be so blatantly blasé about their faith, because I've seen it have real impact at times, and I've seen so much good. And yet it's been a double-edged sword for our family where, beautiful faith that my parents have lived out, and also some really deeply wrong beliefs. So verbally, of course, they would say, no, this is attributed to God and his mercy in our lives. But hindsight, you can see where certain things happened and maybe twisted some of it. It felt like this was the right direction to go. And at this point in my life, who's to say it's not? Because I'm here and I'm okay. And I'm talking to you about, this and everything else. But they had over the next 10 years after my sister was born, they had 7 children in 10 years. So it changed our world after the birth of my younger sister. And then they were homeschooling. Then we left our mainstream evangelical, church, and went towards not being able to find a church that was Christian enough, that was holy enough, that was held to the same standard as I think they would say. A lot of false pride in the exclusivity of the group, and the others are not as godly as we are. We have been called to be a holy priesthood type of verbiage that started happening.
And that came from this, what did you call it? ATI?
ATI. Mm-hmm.
Is that sort
Bill
of the...
Gothard is the founder of it. He's recently been in the news the last few years over massive sex scandals and sex abuse. Ta-da! What do you know?
Yeah, typical of sort of those types of groups, though, I think, right?
Yes. Repressive, celibate. He called himself kind of like a reincarnated Paul. Type of, and I love the writing of Paul.
Yeah,
this man was not Paul. It's so it just a lot of downhill really fast. So between the ages of 7, when my sister was born. By the time I was 17, my family had gone fully into this cult and kind of downhill fast. My mother developed massive depression, homeschooling 9 children by herself. My father is a very successful businessman who has always been a workaholic. That did not change just because he suddenly went from having 2 children to 9 children. Never mind that his wife is homeschooling and we live on a 40-acre farm that we're all running.
Whoa.
Us, me and the kids. And, living a very secluded lifestyle at this point. So home church, it became at one point home church. My mother sewed our clothes and we were matching. We wore the uniform of the group. I call it a cult, but I still have friends and family who are either in it or not in it, because this doesn't really exist in its current form, but still hold a lot of beliefs and loyalty towards. They don't like me calling it a cult, but
Yeah, but you feel free to call it whatever you like. I mean, obviously, especially in this forum, I'm not going to get offended, but I can see why someone who believes it wouldn't want it to be called a cult.
Right. Because, and there are people who didn't treat it as a cult, who were perfectly fine, who came all the way through it and never took it to the extreme. And I know those people, and you're right, that was wrong, and don't toss the baby out with the bathwater, and you're right, we need to hold these people accountable, and I don't know why y'all went as far into it as you did. We were there, type of, so it's very complicated because it was non-denominational, and, I feel like I've gotten in the weeds a little, but
it doesn't sound like a typical cult, because the fact that some people were able to not go all the way in is very different from a usual, like most cults. It's like once you're in, they take you all the way in and there's no other option, right? You're in or out kind of thing.
Right. Well, it was a very unique, because they really united behind the leader and the principles that he taught. And so you have he's very charismatic, seemingly very godly, very, he wrote, basically, there's series, a library full of books that we had in our home, all written by this group. Very well done books, beautifully, put together and preached from and taught. We learned Greek through this, program. We all took Greek. It was very deep, but deeply flawed. So it allowed a lot of different denominations, because it gave it more power. It was really the most powerful binding fact was the leader, the principles, and the fact that you homeschool and don't use birth control.
Hence the 9 children.
That's the 9 children. So you have, my mother, who had always wanted a large family, suddenly went from wanting a large family, not being able to have a large family, to suddenly having a large family foisted upon her, more than she'd ever bargained for, hoped for, and wanted. So it went overboard for her as well, but it was too late. They'd already submit to your husband, submit to the male line, wives don't, you can speak your concerns, but you don't have to be listened to, but you must obey your husband. You must submit to authority. The husband must submit to the authority of his pastor. If the pastor is not a righteous man according to my book and my religious beliefs that I've laid out in our conferences, then you don't need to be at that church. You need to find a church that does. And if you can't, then using Christian doctrine and dogma, you then need to create your own church, because there is no priesthood between you and the Father. And that is both true and completely out there from the perspective of what I think true Christian doctrine teaches about authority and being under a leadership in some kind of community where it's communal growth.
Right.
So very strange again, strange world. Well, by the time in that 10-year time frame, though, we went from, I feel like we went full circle, and it just was really chaotic to be a child and have almost every other year or so things change dramatically in your life, to going to school, to in a normal church and having a social life, to having multiple siblings and being homeschooled and no church, no outlet, to then we started and wearing the homeschool uniform of, navy blue and white and matching homemade outfits and eating a certain Old Testament diet, to then going back into, well, we don't have to take it that far. I guess we will allow you to, when I was 13, I was allowed to wear makeup, because by that time my mother had decided I cannot be a homespun shrew. I can't do it. It's not who I am. I tried so hard. I can't do it. And my dad, of course, was like, okay, well, that's fine. We'll allow you to dress how you want again. Okay, that's good. You dress that way, and we don't have to wear the clothing, and we'll only wear the dresses when we're around our group, because we remained a part of the homeschool group. And then my parents were suffering from not having a church family. So eventually they found churches that were not as godly as they hoped, but they will abide it, because our children need a church life. If we're going to homeschool, they need some socialization,
right?
Church life. So, and I'm thankful for that, of course, as well, because it could have been really a lot worse. So I guess once by the time I was 7, and we were moving around a lot during this time period as well. So we moved from Georgia to Ohio to Oklahoma to Texas for like not even, I feel like that was like a stopover. And then Michigan to Alabama.
Wow.
And so at 19, my parents moved us to Alabama. We had gone all over the place, from Presbyterian churches to Southern Baptist. It was where we started. By the time we were back in Alabama, we were back at Southern Baptist churches. My parents stopped homeschooling. They put them in private Christian school, because by this time my parents' marriage is in shatters, because the pressure of all of this has just gotten to my mother specifically. There are, let's see, if I'm 19, my sister would have been 12, so there would have been 7 children, 12 and under.
Whoa. What?
So, I know. Imagine that for just a second, and then just, you think your life is chaotic. If you've ever seen the Jim Gaffigan comedian who says, you feel like you're drowning and then someone hands you a baby, that's what having 5 kids is like. That was my entire life growing up. So, from the time I was 7 years old, there was a baby that shared my room. I'm the oldest daughter. So, because when the next one was born, that one still may need a nighttime feeding bottle. My mother's got a newborn. So my mother had the newborn, and the baby moved into my room in a crib, and I took over the bedtime feeding for the baby. And then when the next baby came, that one moved into either the boy room or the girl room, whichever side of the house, because we're very segregated by gender and 9 kids. Boys are on this side, girls on this side. And then you get the next baby, and then it just kept going.
Was it basically like every year there was a new baby in your house?
Between the closest 2 are 15 months apart, and the farthest 2 are 2 years.
Unbelievable. Yeah, no doubt. You're saying it got to your mom. I wonder why.
I know. I wonder why. I've had 2 children, and it's,
sometimes you just want to pull your hair out.
The hormones alone, they say it takes 2 years for your body to, in your that's your full biology. That's the hormones. That's everything to completely regenerate itself from childbirth. And so you think of, okay, 2 years to 2 years, she never had a moment to recover. So I have a lot of empathy for a lot of the insanity that she put us through. a lot of her, emotional problems that she had coming from an abusive home, and then creating a emotional just hotbed within our family life. Just it could be traumatizing at times. So
I can imagine. Holy.
yeah. So yeah.
I'm surprised you have kids after that, because you were basically, from the time you were what, 7, you were like mummy number 2.
Kind of, yeah.
Giving babies nighttime feeds, Kirstin,
Yeah.
that's mummy business. So you were definitely mummy number 2, not kind of. That's amazing.
Right. No, it's a weird place to be in too, because I'm 7 years older than my next youngest. So we did feel, my older brother and I, a lot of times like extra parents, backup parents to the children, because there were a lot. And
Yeah.
it's, we were a very well disciplined family in a lot of ways. It was a very much, it had to be. There was a lot of things that I take from that I'm very thankful for. Homeschooling, it taught me to be a self-starter. I had a lot of fear and shame growing up that homeschooling I would somehow not be as smart as everyone around me. So, oh my word, it was terrifying to never know if you were on standard with people around you. So even though we were a part of these homeschool groups that, we did testing through, and we were fairly active in our homeschool groups. I know I've talked to a lot of folks who've had a lot of different experiences, and my younger siblings even had a completely different experience than I did. Because again, by the time I'm 19, my parents were falling apart, and there's a 12-year-old around who their teenage years are completely different than mine. And they got to see all of I got the best of my parents in a lot of ways, and my younger siblings got just the full brunt of the worst, the destruction era.
Yeah.
So, I think my older brother and I felt a lot of responsibility and empathy for them, and have kind of been surrogate parents in a lot of ways to our younger siblings. But we try really hard not to be and put ourselves as adults as parents. We're trying to know them as siblings and just say, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. There's life out here that we can go live and enjoy, and put this down. So,
yeah. So are a lot of your siblings still embedded in that group or in that sort of belief system, or?
Absolutely not. No,
Okay.
the family has, so there's pros and cons here. My parents are divorced. They were separated for several years, and they've been divorced for, I think, close to 5 now, which has been very good. It was, at that point, the best thing that could possibly have happened for our family. So no, they are a mixed bag. It's all over the place. It's, we have our, I'm probably I think my older brother's probably the most traditional in that mindset. He probably will always be. He's still very loyal to that mindset, even though he doesn't practice it. There's a lot of that leftover loyalty to what could have been versus what it reality became.
And what is that, if you could sort of briefly, or not even briefly, take as long as you want, if you had to describe that mindset, how would you describe it? I'm assuming you're talking about the mindset of that organization that you came from, right?
Legalistic is the biggest word that comes to mind as far as describing this group. Legalistic, judgmental, holier than thou, very dogmatic about arguing the reality of God and Jesus and creationism. We learned there was a lot of study of evolution, of course, growing up, to disprove it through creationism.
So wait, no, hang on. You got to take me back to the beginning of that one. You guys, as part of your homeschooling group, you studied evolution in order to disprove it with creationism?
Well, actually, my homeschool group, our local homeschool group, did not uh, they taught evolution, but not for that end. The group, the homeschool group, as the cult,
Right.
I'll call it, because there's different entities. The cult would, of course, teach you debating and theology and that type of thing, and give you cliff notes that you needed to memorize and study our side deeply. But here's the cliff notes of what you're going to be coming up against. But they actually were very much almost like a banned books type of thing. They repeatedly would send out lists of books not to let your children read this. It will turn them into an atheist. And so, books that will turn your children into atheists, of course, you don't want your children reading. But
debatable.
Well, according to this group.
Yeah, no, I know.
So let me clarify. According to this group.
Yes, of course. Yeah, no.
So of course, there's just a lot of that. The mindset of these groups, I think, is ultimately all of them wanted to do better. I do think that this group preyed upon hurting people, and the basic principles of life were good principles. It was when you got deeper into their theology that things really got skewed, really twisted. Like, I can't even, for instance, I think one time there's a whole section in one of their manuals of how grace isn't grace. And they took scriptures on the meaning of grace and would directly contradict them and say that grace doesn't exist. Therefore, if you don't follow the checklist and the rules, you're going to hell. So, handing you truth with one hand and then taking it away with the other was a common practice within this group. It was a very patriarchal, male-dominated system as well. You had to be under what they called the umbrella of protection. So it was a metaphor for, all the family members have to be under the father has to be under the pastor needs to be under Bill Gothard, ideally.
Yeah, really.
And then Bill Gothard is under the authority of God.
Yeah, presumably.
Presumably.
Yeah.
So all of this is, of course, I'm 19. We moved to Alabama. I meet my husband, Tyler. I don't know if he's going to be my husband at that point. My family is falling apart. They're now going back to the Southern Baptist Church. No one's homeschooling. My parents' marriage is falling apart. This thing that gave my parents so much life has now destroyed my parents, and they don't see it. They're still both weirdly clinging while changing directions, as they've been doing all along, which created no consistency among the upbringing of their children. Wild pendulum swings from uber conservatism back towards at times some mysticism type of things, but then from my mother, but then that would quickly get stamped out as being too new age, and then they'd pendulum swing back over here, and we can't listen to rock and roll music, and then, oh, well, I guess we'll let you listen to the Beatles and oldies because that's okay, because we listened to it when we were kids and we were okay. It's this new stuff that will rot your brain.
Wow.
So my siblings are still, my parents, they've gone their separate ways. My dad has changed so much for the better, but still verbally espouses it while simultaneously not living any of that, and he's happier and healthier, but he can't quite not say he doesn't believe it, but he will apologize for how it hurt us as children. So I take that as some positive growth on his part.
Yeah.
That he has apologized for what has happened to our family.
But there's still a part of him that, like you said, is clinging to it or identifies with it, maybe.
Right. So deeply religious upbringing basically is where we've gotten to. So deeply religious, from my perspective, it meant a lot. And it exposed me to almost every single sect within Christianity in our search for something spiritual and godly enough. And so from my perspective, it was painful to not have consistency in belief, and yet always have this sense of impending doom and shame and God on high watching you, waiting for a mistake. And yet my personal experience had never matched what was being told from my family, from my churches that we were visiting. And at times when it was conflicted by the churches that we visited, because again, New Age churches all the way to Pentecostal, to Presbyterian, to Southern Baptist, to Methodist, we visited all of these. And weirdly, my father felt like it was important for us to learn the theology behind each of them and be able to discuss it around the table. So my parents are both very highly intellectual people, love debate, taught us debate. We would have deeply philosophical conversations around the table. This was a big part of our upbringing, was being able to discuss big ideas and big thoughts, and all within this safety of home and my parents being able to guide us. But I'm very thankful for the free thought that was given. Kind of, it was just enough to lead me down where I am now, which
Yeah, but it may not have been. It may have been partially inadvertent, because as a byproduct of being exposed to all these different denominations, you can't help but develop more skepticism and a little bit more of a objective eye, because you've seen so many variations, right? I mean, but it sounds like the thing that I picked up on that I find most fascinating is that there was consistency between most of these places. It sounds like the shame, the fear of impending doom, and paranoia from this invisible sky daddy watching your every move. Those were the consistent threads that you found at most of these places.
Right.
How remarkable is that? They're all different, obviously. I mean, all these denominations, but they all carry that same thread, right?
Yes, absolutely. When you get in a one-on-one individual basis, I think you can speak to people's individual faith and you can get beyond that. But in general, I do think the group think is God on high waiting for you to make a mistake, for, judgment is coming. And if you don't believe to a certain level, then you're not a true believer, and bad things happen. You're basically going to hell and you're leading others astray. How dare you? So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Enneagram.
The personalities, right? The personality test. Again, Tyler is the one who introduced me to it, and I'm familiar, but not super familiar.
It's a very interesting concept they have three basic, shame, fear, and anger as the three core motivators. And, shame, of course, is that one just resonated with me so much when I was reading about this, because shame is the story of my life. Not ever, if you're a true seeker, as I feel like I've always been a seeker, being exposed to all of these different theologies within Christian faith, I had a lot of questions and I asked them. And, so many times was just told, well, I didn't get the go-to answer that, say, Tyler got, where they were irritated that I was asking. My parents liked us asking questions because they knew that was a sign that you were thinking about things, and they encouraged us to think about spiritual things, because if we were thinking about spiritual things, then our mind was in the right place. Right. But they still kept giving just what I felt were just weak answers that didn't answer the big question. And so I'm 19 and I discovered Reformed theology, which is, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Reformed. It's like Calvinism. I think I've heard you speak of Calvinists. Are you familiar with Calvinism?
I'm not. You know what? To be honest with you, I love talking to people like yourself, because I have very, very, very little knowledge and experience in any Christianity of any kind. So, well, teach me.
It's basically there's two main trains of thought outside of Protestant and Catholic. In the Protestant view, there's two main thoughts of free will versus the sovereignty of God, is basically, or predestination, I think is what they call it. Predestination versus free will. So I had never gotten a clear answer from my parents on the sovereignty of God versus free will. Mainly, as I now know, my parents disagreed on it. Oh. And so my mother is a free will advocate, and my father is a predestination advocate. And so I got conflicting answers all the time, and I sensed them not understanding it, and so I never got a full answer because neither of them wanted to push me towards the others or towards their own. They wanted me to find out on my own, or at least my father did. And my mother was just terrified of predestination. So, it's a mixed bag there. But, I had this thought, and I remember it really spoke to me, the predestination, because as you go into predestination, you find out that everything is ordained. There are no accidents. That means you and me talking here right now about all of this happened so that I could talk to you right now about all of this. And that was really comforting to me. And growing up with a classical education where we were reading Shakespeare and Greek mythology was a big part of our curriculum growing up. I read mythology, was one of the first things that I was able to just read, and my parents let me go as far and as deep and as wide as I possibly could, because they didn't feel like it was anything except, these old stories, and it's fascinating, and this will show you how good Christianity is, because look what people used to believe. And I, of course, am just like a little sponge, just gathering it all up, just, love this is amazing. And so it's just this fascinating world for me. Mythology and history just opened up for me.
Can I stop you? I got to ask you a question. Did you at any point in your sort of discovery and love of mythology, did you ever associate, say, the stories in Genesis to mythology? Did you ever think like, well, this, when you were reading Genesis or when you were thinking about the Bible, did you ever think like, this is a lot like the myth that I love so much?
Well, I did actually. One of the big things that I asked my parents about was so I learned this. I'd always known this Greek mythology, and I said, isn't that funny how this is telling the same story as Jesus? And my parents would go, that's right, because truth is everywhere and it has to be everywhere. And so they had no problem with that. That just, for them, again, led me straight to Jesus. So, because truth is everywhere. So if it's not true over here, then it can't possibly be true with Jesus either. So that's never really been a conflict for me thought-wise. So
that's very cool.
Truth is truth.
Yeah.
It's universal, or it's not.
Yeah, well, and I tend to agree with what your parents said. So yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. Very cool. Yes. Sorry, so you were talking about Reformed theology.
Well, Reformed theology led me to one of the biggest moments where I changed towards my parents, and I think they were a little afraid. I had been reading about Hinduism, and I just found it fascinating. I just thought, Hinduism was just fascinating. And then I discovered, predestination, and that's the sovereignty of God. That means there are no accidents. Everything is according to divine will, and it all is part of even evil is part of some great purpose of good and evil playing out cosmically all the time. And I loved this. And I told my mom one day, I was sweeping the floors in the kitchen, and I told her, I said, Mom, did you know Hinduism was created by God? God loves Hindus. He's leading people to him through Hinduism. And my mother just lost her damn mind.
I bet.
Right there in the kitchen, just could not handle it. Chewed me up looking back, I can tell how terrifying this must have been for her to have me say, did you know? Like, that's amazing, because that was just life-changing for me. And I'm like, hey, it's 1,000 paths. It's everywhere. There's it's leading you somewhere. beautiful, and we can't even explain it. And how ridiculous to try to say that ours is this, because if this is the foundation of everything, if this is basically what we believe, that if there is a God, and God is all powerful, and God is all seeing, and God is all this, and truth is everywhere regardless, then that means that every single thing that happens, that means this religion over here, that means our Hindu neighbors, because we lived in Michigan and had neighbors who were Hindus. That means our Hindu neighbors and our Catholic neighbors across the street. Oh, yeah. And our Pentecostal ones behind us, and the Muslim neighbors who live 5 houses down. That means God created all of those to lead each of those people to Him in ways we don't understand.
So this is kind of what you started to tell your mother that day when
Yes!
she freaked out. Oh my God.
Because
that's beautiful.
We're Christians. We're right. You know, that's what this is. How could you possibly think this? And don't you know they've made a choice to reject the one true God?
Wow. So you were 19 at this time?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. You understood more in that at 19 than some people understand in a lifetime. That's amazing.
It was huge for me. It was just this, it just felt like I couldn't contain it. Like I was just like, and then that was my first experience with sharing it. And as a shame person, I stifled that. It really hurt a lot. Because then my dad heard about it, because my mom talked about it. And then he had to have a talk with me about, yes, we believe you're like me. You believe in predestination. I've been really proud of you, but this is the thing you have to be careful of with that. You can't take it too far. And I'm going, what do you mean you can't take faith too far? Like, I thought that was the point.
Oh my goodness.
I don't understand.
Brutal. So you felt shame, but did you ever doubt that aha revelation moment, that the conclusion that you came away with that you just beautifully recounted for me? Did you ever start to doubt that, or were you just ashamed that you hurt your parents or that you frightened them?
It was kind of a mixed bag. I secretly believed it and felt ashamed because
for believing
I knew what I had believed. I knew what I experienced was real. I knew that this moment it's so, I'll never forget it. It's deeply, meaningful. That entire time of my life was just, I had been reading a lot, weirdly, just a lot of weird stuff. I was just reading, and it was so meaningful. I couldn't discount it, even though my parents were telling me I was wrong.
Right.
Even though then I started talking to people who thought it was wrong. Then we moved from Michigan right shortly after that to Alabama, got in a different church, and I still had my little secret belief, but I never talked to anybody about it after that because, this is, just not what, and I felt shame, like maybe I'm wrong. I am only 19 years old. And I don't know everything. And I am a woman who had to fight to be allowed to go to college. Part of my younger sisters went to school, no problem. My parents just did these weird pendulum swings all over the place. But I had to convince them that I needed to go to college, that I wanted to, and I did. And, that mindset of you aren't as smart as your older brother. You don't need an education like your older brother, because
that's the patriarchy, right?
Right. You will never have a need to support a family like your brother. You'll be taken care of. And if you're not, then you married the wrong man.
Oh, Lord.
And that's your sin to bear. And just as Eve and Adam bore the burden of their sin against God by having to work, if you make the wrong choices, you will suffer that same fate and will work for your bread. So that was taught to me from a young time, just my whole life.
Yeah. I feel
So
like the doctrine of original sin especially is, I think part of me wants to say it's like a form of psychological or emotional abuse to teach that to children, to tell them that, you were born a sinner and you inherited this thing from these two
mhm.
people who, whatever, may or may not have lived. I feel like if that becomes a part of your mentality early on, it's got to have like detrimental effects on you. And like shame, for example, something that you talked about, like that must be a very common emotion for people who internalize the idea of original sin, don't you think?
I would definitely imagine that it would. And that was one of the main reasons that predestination and um, Reformed theology, the sovereignty of God, was so appealing, was because there was actually grace,
Hmm.
whereas a lot of the doctrines did not allow for grace.
Right.
Because if it's this full, predestined, then everything you have is a gift and it's grace to be poured out to cover your shame with. So that was my take, was that it had helped me with my shame that had
Hmm.
come from this other, mixed bag of Christianity that I was
Right. And
handed. So very,
sorry, like I said, I'm quite ignorant with regards to these traditions. What is grace? I mean, I've heard it referred to in a lot of Christian circles, but I don't fully understand what's the concept of grace. Obviously, it's important.
right. Well, I think the go-to response of what is grace is the unearned, unasked for gift of God on an unholy life. I think would be, what they would teach, or what
Sure.
I was taught. Um, I know there's a better definition that someone gave me at some point that I had to memorize. You know,
I'm glad you forgot it. I'd rather hear it from like just from your heart and your, I don't want to rehearse, I can go Google it or look in Webster's
right,
dictionary. I want to know
right,
from you what grace is. So that's,
right.
yeah, no, that makes sense. It's a good definition as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it's grace is divine love, I think, poured out.
Right. Freely.
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
makes it
Yes,
rain on the
not
just and
simply.
the unjust alike, right?
Yes,
One
yes,
of the few
absolutely.
scriptures I know.
That's Proverbs. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but it's true, right? I mean, and that's kind of the view of nature or God or fate that I sort of hold is, look at nature. It brings up the crops that feed us and then it wipes us out with an earthquake. It's not, it makes it rain on the just and the unjust alike. That's the kind of God that I understand, because it's not
right,
partial and it's not biased. It's a force, a cosmic,
right.
all-encompassing force. Anyway, sorry, I digress. So Reformed theology is a Christian denomination, or what is
No,
that?
it's just a theology. Within Southern Baptist tradition, there are free will and Reformed theology schools of thought that are both taught, and they're both acceptable
Oh, I
within.
see.
So there's a lot of. I do think there's a lot of nuance when if you're able to get beyond the denomination and the basic hypocrisy that exists. There's everywhere. There's a lot of interesting nuance that is allowed, and free, thought within Protestantism, especially. I think that's why there's so many different denominations. Is we could say that the Methodist Church across the street, they're still Christian, because even though we believe something different, we all know these are tenets that we disagree on, but ultimately we agree on the main point, and that is, Jesus. This is what I was taught. Jesus is born of a virgin, wholly conceived by Father God Almighty. He died and he rose again on the third day, and one day he will come again to, redeem all of mankind,
So
judge
that's
mankind. Depending on
so
which
that's kind
direction
of
we're going.
mainstream.
Right. Mainstream Christian thought is along that line. So since then, of course, I've come a long way. um, and I think it's been a good journey overall. Is having met Tyler, still holding this secret faith, that I had, even though we met in a Southern Baptist church. We, where his uncle was the pastor, his aunt was our Sunday school teacher. She set us up. My husband taught vacation Bible school one summer with my mother.
Wow.
We were in the same town for college, and they thought it would be a good idea for us to drive together back to, the hour drive from where we were both at school back home for weekends. So it was, wasn't an arranged marriage. We weren't in that world at that point at all. But these two women definitely thought we needed to, they definitely were Southern matchmaking mamas.
Well, it sounds like they were good at their job. From what you're telling me about yourself, I mean, obviously I had a conversation with your husband like a year and a half ago, and I mean, so many parallels. I mean, you guys had very similar, like he was telling me about homeschooling his brothers, and like you guys have so many things in common that, whether they meant to or not, those ladies did a fine job.
Right. And it's been an interesting journey because, you talked with Tyler, so you've heard his story from, this deeply Christian upbringing that we had. And then of course when we got, by the time he was questioning things when we got married, but was also hiding it
from you even.
Right. Because I'm hiding my secret faith that, that God is so sovereign that everything is about God. And it's, but I still believe these, I felt like I had a preference towards this. And but the world that I'm in didn't have a preference toward it. They have a requirement for it.
Right. Yeah.
We're in the South. This is Alabama.
Yeah.
It's the Bible. We're the buckle of the Bible Belt.
Wow.
We're the holding it all together.
What a great way to put it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There it is. So it doesn't get any more deep South, red state, and there's beautiful things that come out of that tradition. And there's some, with equal measure, there are some real hellish things that have come from that. And I think that's duality as well. You go as high as your heights, or as deep as your roots go. And it's the same here in the South. There's a lot of, deep pain that's ugly and brutal. And there's some beautiful branches on the tree as well.
Yeah. I can't really imagine that the tradition itself is to blame, or the book even. I mean, just especially, just thinking of like mainstream conservatives in the US, right? A lot of their policy in the government is 100% counter to the teachings of Christ and the teachings of Christ according to the book that they profess to. So for me, it's like, you're right about there being trauma in the South and pain and stuff. And in my mind, it's like the tradition is almost just like a vehicle for that pain. It's not the tradition that is causing it or creating the sort of ugliness. It's like the ugliness is there, and they're like, no, this is my book, so I'm just going to use it to carry my crazy ideas into the world that are not represented in the book, not fairly anyways. Right. Like how do you reconcile that in your head? I mean, not you personally, because you don't seem to hold those beliefs, but people that you probably know and associate with. How do you associate with people who hold such contradictory beliefs, and especially when some of those beliefs lead to kind of abhorrent behavior? Do you have to do that? Is that something that you're faced with in your life, or do you just stay away?
Well, no, because we have family all around us. There's family, we have friends. Everyone we know is, a Christian who goes to church. Wow. I shouldn't say everyone we know, because obviously we're the rare folks who know the atheists down here and the liberals. We hang out with them.
But they are there.
they're
okay. All right. They exist. They're there. Okay.
And Birmingham is probably the highest concentration of, we are the liberal bastion of this southern area is Birmingham, Alabama. It's the most liberal city in the state. and it's where all the Democrats basically.
Okay, very
They
cool.
need
I
to
didn't know
spread
that.
out a little bit. If we didn't, then nothing would ever.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I've heard, I mean, and I've seen graphs and charts that show kind of like the red and the blue in your country. And it seems like the blue is really just concentrated on major urban centers, and then all the rural areas in between. It's like a hotbed of red and then these really bright blue spots.
Right.
So Birmingham is obviously a pretty decent sized city, I would imagine.
I'm trying to think of what size I could say it is. It's small.
Okay.
It's not Atlanta.
Okay.
It's probably not even a quarter of Atlanta's size.
Okay.
But it's the biggest city in Alabama. But Alabama is one of the lower populated compared to Georgia. I think Atlanta has more people than the whole state of Alabama.
Wow.
Because Atlanta's massive.
Yeah, right. But you said it's the biggest city in your state.
Yes.
And so it would make sense based on these theories that the concentration of progressives and Democrats and liberals would be in at least the biggest city in the state. Whether it's big or not, relatively speaking, is not really an issue, right?
And even our liberals are, what we would call blue dog Democrats. They're the old, they're not the Bernie Sanders modern, Democrat types at all. So even our liberals are considered conservatives by New York and California.
Sure, I can see that. Yeah, so they're more centrist than left leaning, basically.
Right. So, but in general, not to say that but in general, that would be, and those are more acceptable as long as you know.
Just don't go talking about socialism now.
Not in Alabama.
No, that's hilarious. Yeah. Oh man, very interesting. Yeah. Again, I don't know much about the U.S. I mean, aside from what I read on the news and stuff. So it's super fascinating to me to hear about the culture, and especially in an area like yours. And I don't know everything that you believe, but just from our brief conversation already, I can foresee that you probably get into some pretty awkward situation. Maybe not awkward, but like, you're like the lone, like you and Tyler are like two people in a sea of people who are totally different from you. You know what I mean? Like, or at least that's what it sounds like.
That's kind of what it feels like a lot of times. I don't know how we found, I'm thankful that we found one another, and that's this journey of having children has just opened us up to one another in a way that we now know each other's stories.
Yeah.
It's the past 5 years since we've had children has changed everything. His journey has come out, my journey has come out. We knew each other's growing up stories and kind of bonded over that. But then beyond that, it was just, we were living the status quo of going to church, trying to do our thing. Tyler's a closet atheist.
Is that how he identifies himself now, as a closet atheist? No, he doesn't strike me as an atheist anymore. But yeah, he went through a phase, didn't he?
He did.
Okay, you got to be quiet if you're going to sit with me. Remember? Okay, no talking, please. Yeah, because I mean, he's definitely. If he tells me he's an atheist, I will be very shocked.
No, he's not. But he went through all of this kind of behind the scenes, non-vocally. He's very quiet. He's very quiet. He's very reserved. But your spouse, you can feel things happening. There were rumblings, and as they say, that I can pick up on. But having children really blew the lid off of everything, and just being a catalyst for us towards where we are now compared to 5 years ago, where we had all of this pain from growing up. We had all of this tradition. We had the commonality of our stories and some weird intersections along that path that really bonded us. And then I felt how genuine he was in his search, and it mirrored how genuine my search was, because he never judged me for anything that I said. He never that was one of our big bonding together initially, was just we could talk about things and not have our parents shame us. There was no shameful question between the two of us on our search and in our journey. So he went through his dark period, and in the middle of that, for whatever reason, we decided it would be a great idea to have children. And you know, he still wasn't communicating his darker thoughts. He was afraid that if he did, he would lose me, because, you know, part of the tradition of Christians is, you know, you're both Christian and that's why you get married. And if you're not Christian, then is there a reason to stay married? And, you know, I think ultimately he was afraid of losing me if he told me the truth that our faith was a lie. And, you know, as he thought at that, you know, particular time. And so we had our oldest in 2012, and lo and behold, postpartum depression struck me in a big, nasty way. And it was a very traumatic experience. I feel like you're a Carl Jung fan, so it's very archetypical, the whole story. I had a traumatic birth experience with my child. So that just archetypically, trauma and birthing really feels like, yes, that is exactly what happened. It was a traumatic birth for a new stage of our lives. And it really feels like that was a big, you know, moment for us. And it feels represented even by this. I suffered a nerve injury during that, and I have permanent nerve damage.
Oh no.
But I have a high pain threshold. I have scoliosis, so I've always had back pain. And so and then of course, someone who suffers with shame, that means you don't talk about what's wrong with you. You talk about what's right with you.
Oh,
and
man.
you know, you're trying to be positive, and, you know, the power of positivity, right? And I can push through this. I'm a go-getter. And if I can't, then I'm just lazy, and I need to shame myself some more to get beyond whatever it is that I'm dealing with poorly. And don't ask for help, because are you weak? What's wrong with you? Because that's shame talking to you while you're going through this stuff. So it took me, I realized that I walked around for 18 months in pain and a limp from that, and just thought, I'll get over it. This pain is going to stop, whatever this is that's making me limp, you know. And then I have postpartum depression. So that was even my physical body felt like the least of my worries. I needed to focus on this postpartum that really blew the lid off of everything that Tyler and I had built up to that moment. I basically set fire to. In an emotional sense. And it burned down walls between the two of us, to where he was honestly sharing what he'd gone through, and in a way that I had been asking for a while, which was beautifully healing of deep pain that we both had that we didn't even know we had. And so moving through this process together of, you know, postpartum, and then having another child, got oopsie-daisy pregnant with baby number 2 when she's 18 months old. And then when I hit the halfway mark with Eleanor, I started falling, because my injury was so bad. And now it was getting worse, because I'm carrying another child in an area that has nerve damage on my spine that makes my legs not work. And that's why I was limping. And now I have atrophy and a bunch of other things. So this is a physical path that led me to a beautifully healing spiritual path, as I think that's so often the case for people. Is, you know, you have this, you know, something is wrong, but you don't even know what it is, because life gets in the way. You are living your life. You're young, you're getting married, you're doing the best you can, you're figuring stuff out. You're becoming your own adult. We were married very young. We were 22 and 23 when we got married. So just babies getting married. We had our first at 28. So it was a lot of just back to back, things that just get in the way of what you know to be searching for truth. Certainty is gone. It's it's all gone because everything's just up in the air.
Yeah.
And so we have this journey of pain is what I would call it. I started physical therapy while I was pregnant, and that physical therapy just was an amazing blueprint, because as I'm going through physical therapy and learning how to turn on muscles that have gone completely atrophied, that have nerve damage, and that you don't even know how to make work. It's a mental and physical process to focus on a muscle that you don't know how to turn on and make it move, and then go through the pain of having a muscle that's damaged and weak, and then slowly building the muscle tone and slowly strengthening it until before you know it, you're strong. You can hold your own weight. You can lift yourself, and is healed, even if you may never not have nerve damage. So Tyler and I are reading all of these things during this time. We're having deep conversations about our marriage, about our faith, about life, about depression, about pain. We're reading Joseph Campbell and Carlos Castaneda's. I don't know if that's how you say his name.
I know who you're talking about, but I can't say his name either.
Right. Herman Hesse again, I'm going to butcher somebody.
You and me both, sister.
Marcus Aurelius, and just everything we can get our hands on, we're reading. We're reading all of it. We're both big readers. We both love to read. Sorry, I'm upset.
It's all good.
And I'm finding these common themes among all of them, and I'm just going, I knew it.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And while I'm having that moment of just, oh my God, and this is, I'm not crazy. This thing that I discovered at 19, and now I'm rediscovering it, 30, I guess, at that point, was just, wow. How, and you have those moments where you go, I knew it and I forgot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That's humbling. It's humbling.
Absolutely. That's amazing.
Like you know something and then you forget it. And then you dig deeper and you say, oh, I forgot it because of shame. Shame that I was wrong. Shame that my tradition told me I was wrong. That I was just a woman who didn't need to research this on her own. I needed to follow the authority of the men in my life, of these priestly, men. I needed to put myself under authority that tells me something completely different than what I know to be true. I hate to say no and shoulds, but.
Well, I mean, you felt it in your heart in a way that it's experiential. It's not like I know something because I read it and I memorized it. It's like, no, you felt the truth of it. And it was like, you didn't, it sounds very similar to my experience. And so to me, it's not like I did anything. It's not like I was pursuing this thing. It friggin' hits you. It happens to you and you feel it and you know it. And it's like, what can anybody say or do, even when you were feeling shame? And that's why I asked you, did you ever stop truly believing? And it sounds like obviously it was there and it just waiting to be rediscovered for you. And when you rediscovered it, it was like, oh yeah, that thing.
Well, and it doesn't feel, I really don't feel like I ever went through like something like what Tyler did, the dark, not that I feel like I've definitely gone through the dark night of the soul, but he went full atheist. I never did. It was more just not living it out, just I know this, but I'm going to keep quiet and not really pursue it and not really see what is happening. I'm just going to, let it, I don't even know that I consciously let it slide. It just kind of sat there in the background and waited dormant, and then, starts whispering in your ear, hey, remember me?
Yeah, the
Remember
still
this
small
moment?
voice, right?
Right. Remember this moment. Remember this truth that know, but that everyone's told you was wrong. That even, I'm a very emotional feeling type person. Tyler's the very cerebral thinking type. We're very good for one another. We're a good balance for
Yeah.
each other. And, Tyler, of course, just logic. If it can't be explained on a piece of paper, then it doesn't exist. And how do you explain what I'm trying to say? And at
Yeah.
that point, didn't have, for years, didn't have language to even speak what, it feels like I'm reading things that I know, but I don't have a way of knowing because I never read about these things before. I hadn't read Joseph Campbell before, a few years ago, but I read these beautiful stories. I read these archetypes. I read I love reading about Hinduism. We're trying to read the, I don't even know how to
Which
say
of
it.
the Bhagavad Gita?
Yes, there
Yes.
you go.
Oh, excellent. Yeah,
With
one of
my
my
southern
favorites.
accent, just try. I can't
You,
even.
side note, I'm disappointed. You do not have a Southern accent, or at least it's so subtle that I can't even enjoy it. So please, the next time we
Well,
talk, like bring it out.
I have my work phone voice. I have lived all over the country, so I try to not get too deep, but I can bring it out. We do say y'all down here.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Um,
Maybe when we break out the wine glasses for the next one, it'll come out more. I have a friend from Oklahoma, and it's just, for her, it only comes out when we get a couple beers in her, and then it just like, whoa, there's the Oklahoma. Like, there we go.
right. Yes.
Well, I got to tell you, Kirsten, your story, your whole journey, the way you and Tyler connected, the parallels between the two of you and your lives is, to me, it's beautiful. And I'm so happy that we got this conversation because, yeah, you guys, like, man, you're inspiring to me because it's like,
Oh,
no, seriously, like more, I don't know, the things that you went through made you stronger together. And you know how many couples are just destroyed by these types of things, like the trauma that you went through, the physical trauma, the spiritual trauma, the doubts, the dark nights of the soul. Those things reinforce your relationship. That's inspirational. And I think a lot of couples would either hate you and feel ashamed about their own relationships when they hear about this, or you give them something to work towards. Because, yeah, I mean, and obviously I'm biased because I have a very similar relationship and experience with my wife where we have just gotten closer and closer over the years. And when you think you can't get any closer, something happens and all of a sudden, boom, you guys are like seeing new dimensions of each other. So it makes me happy that there are other people out there who are enjoying similar things. And I'm really happy for you guys.
Thank you. That's very kind. It hasn't always been fun, but ultimately we love each other. And I think, I love to preach the gospel of love more than anything else. Cause that, man, that's transformative. Having someone who can love you at your darkest, dankest, post baby depressed self is huge.
18 months of sweatpants.
Right. It's rough. And then my husband is, he's gone through depression. I'm sure he would say the same, it's no joke. Life is no joke. And there's real pain that comes with these experiences that we've both had and just pain of the real world. I don't even think you have to go through trauma to understand what the pain of life is. But, I'm so grateful. That's the biggest thing. I'm grateful to have a partner who's willing to love me as we go through this journey, because it definitely makes all the difference in the world. It makes it easy to say, that well, just to have someone to talk theology with, just to have someone to talk philosophy with, to talk politics with. Like, he's my best, he's my biggest fan as far as, conversation partners. I do think we go to each other a lot, because we can be very deep. We can be there, and then still give each other freedom to go and read some crazy thing on some weird thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys, there's no separation in your relationship, or at least it doesn't sound like there is. Because I had a friend one time. I'd known him for a while, and I never met his wife. And he's like, "Oh yeah, me and Ange, we keep things separate. Like, she's got her friends, I got my friends. We don't like to mix and match." And I found that very strange, because for me and for you, it sounds like as well, it's like, this is my partner. I share everything with them. And, you might be more into philosophy and he might be more into something else, but you still share those things together. And it might not be your, whatever it is, it's like you guys are in it together, and there's no separating, well, this is my thing that I do. And, it's all mixed in.
Well, I do think that's a big, for us, me, I think that's a big driving force for me. I've, early on, he kind of fought me on this thing, but I think now he would agree. I've taught him relationship, and he's taught me boundaries. We've taught each other a lot of really good things, because we're both introverted loners. So we understand that we have to have alone time to recharge. He's handling the kids while I'm talking to you. And, every day we give each other alone time, because we need our alone time away from the kids and just away from each other. That's where we recharge. But ultimately, my thought was always, what's the point of having a partner if it's not a real partner? A partner is someone who knows me, who I know. And I'm not going to just go willy-nilly, share everything with everyone, but to have a true partner in life, and then a friend as well, because he's definitely my best friend, has definitely impacted my life for the better.
Yeah. Well, and that's the key, right? Like, the way I described it to a friend of mine was like, basically, it's like, imagine your best friend that you can just hang out with every day. And then imagine that they're hot and you have sex with them. And then imagine that you guys share everything. That's basically what it should be, in my opinion. Not what it should be. That's what I was looking for. And I wasn't going to settle before I got that. Right. And I mean, I don't know about you, but like, I had other girlfriends in the past. They were attractive. They were nice. They were funny. There was absolutely nothing wrong with them, but it wasn't there. The spark wasn't there. I knew within 2 days, and it's like, I don't know if that's just me or not, but I have a suspicion that people ignore that and settle because they're afraid of solitude.
I would agree. I would agree with that. I also think people don't settle for a soulmate because a soulmate may not meet, when they do have that feeling between, my own family tried to talk me out of marrying my husband. Certain family members, his family members, we don't match. Everyone's told us we don't match. And yet
in
now
what way?
We match so well because
Yeah.
we become adults together that we can't imagine. And I don't think people who know us and who've met us now see that we don't match. But our families for years, my sister just a few years ago told me, she said, I didn't understand why you married Tyler for the longest time, but she lived with us when she was a teenager for a summer. And she said, but I get it now. I really love Tyler. He's a great guy. I get it now. But, it took us being married for years they just didn't see it, because they didn't know who I was. They didn't know who my husband was. They had no idea. We were fitting the mold of the homes and the environments that we grew up in, and we married. And thankfully, we did find one another, even though, his dad told him when he met me, and not in a nice way, but how'd you get her? She's never going to stay with you.
Whoa. So you must have some really fun, like, family dinners, hey?
Oh, we try not to.
My Lord. Well, yeah, I mean, like, they clearly didn't know you guys. And that's not surprising because, again, before you can know someone, you have to know yourself. And from what, I mean, just
Right.
taking a wild guess here, probably they don't have that much knowledge of self themselves. So how can they possibly know you, right?
Yeah.
No offense. No
I
offense,
feel
Kirsten's family.
I try not to be right. I try not to be judgmental of
No.
others, but yeah.
But it's,
And
you
then
don't have to
here's
be.
the
I'll be
Southernism
judgmental.
for you. Right. Well, and then here's the Southernism for you. At that point, you just go, "Well, bless their heart."
What else can you say, right?
What
And
else? Bless their heart.
the fact that you guys both know like that each other's families were talking behind each other, behind your backs, and you guys are just like, whatever. That almost to me is a bigger victory than being bitter and carrying a grudge about it, because it's like, I don't even care what you think. Like, that's what that speaks to me.
Right. Well, now it's funny for both of us because we're just like, can you believe that I'm still with you all these years later? Oh my God. It must piss them off.
That's too funny.
We are proving them wrong.
Yeah.
They hate our guts because they just knew I was going to be this whatever thing. And
It's like, nope, flipped it on them.
right. And
Yeah.
here we are,
Good for you guys, man. That's awesome. Well, speaking of partnerships, I can hear kids in the background. I'm sure you've got kids that are like, why is mom in this weird room talking to the computer? So what say you? Let's wrap it up.
Absolutely.
Okay. And before we go, I've been trying to do this. I did it in my earlier ones and I have been forgetting, but I want to do it with you.
Okay.
One idea, one piece of advice, one principle or belief that has had a huge impact on you that you want to share with people.
Okay. I think if you look within and find out who you are, you'll discover everything that you need to know. I really, that's, it's, everyone says that, right? And there's nothing to add to that. I really do believe, look within, find out who you are. And then the biggest thing that I've done that helps me day to day when I'm struggling, if I'm having a real, to use a Jungian term, animus possessed moment.
Yeah.
I can stop and ask myself, who am I? That is such a grounding question, because then suddenly I realize, well, I'm certainly not this screaming shrew who's losing her shit over, someone spilling milk on themselves or whatever the catastrophe of the moment is, a job being lost, or, an interview, or spilled milk, or late for school, or whatever it is.
Amen.
Who am I?
Yeah.
Or marriage,
great.
A sticky situation in marriage. Listen to yourself. Is the person talking you?
Wow.
And that just is, most of the time I find that it's not me. And I just have to stop and go, guys, mommy stepped out for a second. I'm back.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Or speaking to my husband, I just got to stop myself right here, interrupt myself, and say, I'm sorry.
Wow.
I stepped out for a second, but I'm here, and, let's start over.
Brilliant. I love it. Who am I?
Who am I?
Yeah.
And that's where my answer, full circle, I'm me. Yeah. There's no other answer for that. And me doesn't behave this way. Excellent. And I'm going to show you who I am right now. And it may take apologizing and owning with full responsibility and understanding of my own actions in that moment, and not whatever else is happening. But me, who am I? Well, I'm me.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, I hope that people who watch this take that advice to heart, because that's a brilliant piece of advice, and I'm going to start doing that. Because I think you have to have the presence of mind to catch yourself when you're, getting mad about the spilled milk or whatever. But for me, it's like I catch myself, I become present. But having that tagline, or that slogan, that maxim, that thing that you ask yourself, I think will help me take it to a deeper level. So thank you very much. That's amazing.
Well, I'm so glad that's helpful.
Yeah, well, it is to me. So I don't care about anybody else who's watching this. Screw you guys.